Nate, Steve, thanks a lot for coming back on. Today we're recording this on the anniversary of Pearl Harbor, so we thought it might be appropriate to discuss that. And I know you two have a ton to say on that, so I say we just kick it off. And Steve, why don't you go into? You sent us all an email about some, you were kind of capturing all your thoughts. Why don't you go ahead and go through that, and then Nate, if feel free to jump in whenever you want to.
Well, just to set the historical and the grand strategy background, historians have been just arguing all over ever since what was Japan thinking, and so first of all, the go before they before their part of the war ever began back in 1932. Japan had this vision of a grand Asian empire. They were going to conquer China, and then they were going to swing right and conquer Siberia. And that, of course, they bogged down in China. And a man you may have heard of, Georgy Zhukov, probably certainly the greatest general in the Soviet Union, uh, gave the Japanese such a bloody nose. He's another guy who intuitively came to a better understanding of air-to-ground warfare, like we've been discussing, and so with them bogged down in China, with Zhukov making it clear that Russia was not going to be the pushover that they were in the Russo-Japanese War. The Japanese start looking southward, Southeast Asia, and all of the tremendous resources, raw material resources that were there, especially oil in Indonesia, or modern day Indonesia, then the Dutch East Indies. And the only fly in the ointment. Well, let's see. This is now 1940 that they're thinking about this, and what's happened in Europe in 1940. The Japanese realized that going to Southeast Asia and the islands of the Western Pacific would bring them head to head with the European imperial powers. Well, France was down for the count, and so their colonies wouldn't be a problem. The Dutch and the Belgians don't enter into this part, but the Dutch had gone even faster than the French, and Britain was obviously on the ropes. So they figured that all of that would be like ripe fruit that would just fall into their hands, except we still owned the Philippines, and so America was going to be the biggest obstacle. So the whole strategy involving Pearl Harbor was there was never any, at least at that point, thought in their mind of conquering the Hawaiian Islands. No, it was meant to be a spoiling attack that, if done successfully, would leave America. All of our naval and land forces in the Pacific were all concentrated in the Hawaiian Islands. So if the Japanese could launch a devastating surprise attack, it would take America months, if not more, even if not longer, to build up a force that would be able to interfere. And as the bombs were falling on Pearl Harbor, there were just a number of Japanese armies and naval forces that were just fanning out across Southeast Asia, across the Western Pacific. It's one of the most amazing whirlwind campaigns, and that part of it, the conquest campaign, was phenomenally successful. They were conquering as fast as they could advance, and so when it came to Pearl Harbor, we all know that story. It succeeded better than the Japanese had ever dared to dream. But we could also talk about some, this is one dark cloud that does have a silver lining. We could talk about that. But the go ahead, Nate.
You also can't talk about Japanese strategy with Pearl Harbor without mentioning oil as well. And 90% of their oil was imported. And once the Chinese pushed south into Indonesia, that led to FDR's oil embargo too. So you have that aspect mixed in.
Yeah. Oh yes, that's right. Well, and that brings up the question of what were they thinking? And thankfully, I mean, here there's actually been some landmark work done by Japanese historians who have basically made it clear that the Japanese, as Nate was just saying, with FDR putting an embargo, total embargo on American oil. The Japanese realized they only had reserves that would last a few months, and so it was to them conquest was the only way Japan, at least as they envisioned it, could survive, and so they had to do something to get oil. And so that meant America had to be at least sidelined for them to accomplish that. So that's why they attacked. And I think we could get into the nuts and bolts of the attack itself, but that gives us a bit of a background.
And that also brings up the first point on grand strategy too, with FDR. FDR. I have other opinions on him outside of war, but we'll keep it to war. He was very good at saying one thing and presenting shaping the public opinion in one direction and doing a completely different thing that wasn't necessarily the will of the American people. Right? He's on one hand, he's not going to war, not joining the war in Europe, and on the other hand, he's setting America up to win a war in Europe. And what does the United States do after Pearl Harbor? The natural thing to do would be to declare war on Japan. But before it does that, it declares war on Europe. Oh, we get bombed by Japan in the Pacific. Let's declare war on Germany and adopt a Europe first grand strategy, right? So, on one hand, FDR's giving into the public opinion that we are staying out of this war while he's prepping for that war and waiting for the pretense to join in on that war, which it's kind of mind blowing that the Axis powers didn't recognize that.
Would you
Yeah,
say
in
that he
fact,
was? I mean, so what you're saying is, and believe me, I'm a couple rungs down on the intelligence ladder in this group. But you're saying that he was fully intending to go to Europe anyway. So he's like, well, now that they bombed Pearl Harbor, now let's just start there and then come around, or what?
Right.
What was this? What was
Uh,
the mindset? What was the impetus behind that?
let me just throw in there that even well before Pearl Harbor, especially after France falls, that's one. Even the American public was starting to swing around to some, at least, preparedness. The first ever in American history peacetime draft is passed only a couple of months after France falls. That is something that I think really reflects the shifting in American mind or public opinion. But as far as the Germany first policy, well, after the fall of France, Britain and America start having very high level military talks. The British Joint Chiefs come over and talk with the American Joint Chiefs. They weren't called the Joint Chiefs at the time, but anyway, and they had come to the realization that if we got drawn into both wars, clearly we had to defeat Germany first. And so one clarification: by the time Japan attacks Pearl Harbor, there was a virtual undeclared naval war going on in the North Atlantic. Probably, you hear the name Reuben James in a lot of different places. Hunt for Red October, for example, and that's because on Halloween of 1941. Full, more than a month and a half before Pearl Harbor, the Germans sink an American destroyer, the Reuben James, and that gives you an insight into the intensity of this undeclared war. But uh, with Pearl Harbor, obviously, Roosevelt's famous Day of Infamy speech, it leads to a declaration of war on Japan. But now, yeah, Roosevelt's in a bind. He knows we got to defeat Germany first. And what solves that dilemma is Hitler, for reasons that still astound a lot of historians. It's Hitler who declares war on America. And this is just, I think it was the 10th of December, so only 3 days after the attack. Hitler solves our dilemma by declaring war. So, but as Nate was saying, who do the Americans want to go after? You know, the American people, they want Japan's head on a stake, Hirohito's head on a stake. So, yeah, this is a rapid America having the good sense to orient its grand strategy in what will turn out to be a very effective manner.
Because yeah, right, FDR set it up for a win-win. So by boxing Japan into a corner, by economically isolating them from the West, one, they backed down and stopped trying to push down into Indochina, and focus on Russia, which is a win for the United States, and we can wait for our pretense to join the war in Europe, or they attack us and give us the pretense to join the war in Europe.
What?
One other,
Oh,
go ahead.
Well, I was
No,
just going
no,
to say, this
Judy,
is kind
go
of
ahead.
off topic a little bit, but wouldn't you say, I mean, do you guys get the impression that even these superior military minds of these other foreign countries, don't you feel like they still underestimate the U.S.? I mean,
Oh yeah.
for Pearl Harbor to even do that at all without knowing some semblance of what the repercussions are going to be, it just seems very, ignorant, frankly. Like they had to have known that. I don't know. It just seems like, and kind of like with 9/11 too, like the terrorists thought, man, we'll just take down the World Trade Center and that'll knock out the U.S. It's like that was like, I mean, it was a tragedy. Don't get me wrong, but it did nothing to the U.S. I mean, we still operated as much as we, it was barely a scratch in the grand scheme of things, and it almost seems like, and I deal with foreign participants quite a bit. Their people's idea of the U.S. is very wrong. I mean, I think they think it's smaller than it is. You know what I mean? I think they think it's smaller. I think they think it's weaker. They equate us to a lot of other countries that are significantly less, powerful and frankly much smaller. I mean, like somebody was comparing us to Sweden the other day. They were like, well, why don't we just do what Sweden does and blah blah blah. And I'm like, well, yeah, I got it, man. Sweden's as big as New Jersey. I mean, big deal. We have a whole entire country to think about. I don't know. What do you guys think about that? Do you think that we are underestimated, or do you think they know what they're doing and they're just taking like a calculated risk, or what do you guys think?
So, right, your point makes more sense to me for 9/11 than it does for Pearl Harbor, and I say that because prior to World War II, the United States hadn't shown up in a global fight or a transnational war and performed extremely well at a really high level and throughout its entire history, right? Yes, we have
Okay.
some involvement in World War One, but it's not like we were the star of that show. We showed up late and we're part of kind of the finishing throes of World War One.
Right.
Whereas pre-World War II, nobody knows if the United States is willing to project power and put lives on the line on the scale that would be necessary in a global conflict like World War II. The United States had
Okay.
just yet to do that yet. And you also have to think of the kind of old world arrogance that the rest of the world has. And Japan is an extreme example of that old world arrogance, especially with, their manufactured samurai culture that they had brought back in the past 100 years prior
Hmm.
to that. And when you get into Europe too, you still have, it's kind of tamped down after World War One, but you still have that old world arrogance that Europe is really where the seat of power is, and the United States probably isn't willing to project power into where the big dogs are, right? Because we're not the big dog that we were in the Cold War yet. We were
Right.
setting ourselves up to do that, and we probably are the big dog that we are after World War II, thanks to FDR positioning the United States in that manner. But I think you have a lot of arrogance thinking that the United States just isn't going to put up the amount of power across the board that they did because there wasn't a precedent for it.
Right.
There's
So it was.
also
So there was arrogance, but it was also ignorance, but because they didn't know any better. I mean, nobody knew what we had, or our abilities. Yeah, it makes sense.
well, I think one other element to throw in there is, just as when you go to war, you have to have your own idea of your goals and your strategic interests. So too, you have to have a clear understanding of your enemy. And I can cite one example to really fit into what we're talking about here. What was the South's view of the North before the Civil War? There's a famous Southern congressman who promises to wipe up all the blood shed by this whole thing with just one pocket handkerchief. They thought the Yankees were a bunch of dissolute, sissy boys, and it's the same thing with, the one common denominator between Germany, Italy, and Japan is they were all in the throes of fascism. And fascism is an ideology that is just custom made to look at America as, again, a bunch of dissipated, pleasure seeking. They're looking, and here you might thank the media or you might thank Hollywood because they had so thoroughly projected Americans as a bunch of bobby soxers and jitterbuggers and zoot suiters
Right.
and
Yeah.
just like in fact, Hitler held Americans, the American people, not America, so to speak, but very much the same as he held Slavs. His famous characterization of how easy it would be to defeat Russia. Just kick in the door, and the whole rotten structure will come crashing down. He and the Japanese, again, to carry their thinking a little bit farther, they're gonna paralyze America militarily with a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, win this whirlwind campaign of conquest, dig in, and then by the time America could potentially do something about it, well, those bunch of dissipated scaredy cats would just decide that, well, it's too hard to fight for, and that we'd cut a deal. Obviously, they are seriously misunderstanding the mood of the American people. But again, it's how you project your image of your enemy. And of course, look what we did toward our enemy in Vietnam, toward our enemy in Afghanistan, toward our enemy in Iraq. You know, I think that's a big part of it as well.
For
And I
sure.
don't think anybody, even domestically, expected the level to which the United States mobilized, both from an industry and from a people
Yeah.
standpoint. I mean, they were well beyond what anyone would have considered best case scenario for the United States' ability to produce ships, tanks, aircraft, ammo, and then the enthusiasm to which people operated and joined the military post Pearl Harbor. I think that was beyond even domestic expectations, let alone the expectations of Japan and Germany.
But that's kind
There's
of what I'm
this.
talking about. Like that, like Germany thought, like you were saying, Steve. Look at these guys just dancing around. They're not even taking life seriously. But that's just a small microcosm of the whole United States. Like they're just pockets of people, types of people. But what they don't understand is the country was full of like, just roughneck farming, tough guys that are not on the TV. They're not having the exposure in the media because the media doesn't care about guys like that. So that they underestimate us because they only see what we want them to see or what we project to the world. So, yeah, I mean, I just think whether, like you were saying, Nate, I think the guys who did 9/11, they should have known better. But yeah, I think Germany and well, frankly, Japan and Italy underestimated us by no fault of their own. They just didn't know any better, and then they learned the hard way that they underestimated us.
And you have that cultural mindset too of, where is your seat of power in Europe? It's in cities, right? And you're sending your spies into New York, Washington
Right.
D.C., and San
Mm,
Francisco, right? You're
yeah.
not sending your spies to Texas, Alabama, Tennessee,
Kansas,
Wisconsin,
Nebraska, yeah,
Utah, right? And
yeah,
it's easy to overlook the culture across the United States when
right,
you have that very ingrained cultural mindset.
Yeah,
for
and
sure.
it's a good lesson point in something that goes across the board, and every one of our young guys, needs to listen to this, and that is that you need to look past the obvious facade. That image that to this day there are people throughout the rest of the world who look at America, especially in Europe, who look at America from the viewpoint of whatever's hot on TikTok today. And if you just take a moment to question your assumptions and look beyond that facade, I'll tell you what, if they had attended just one NRA convention, but even the industrial, fairly early, it might have been in his State of the Union address immediately after Pearl Harbor. FDR calls on the American aircraft industry to produce 50,000 aircraft in the coming year. Supposedly, when Hitler heard that, he guffawed. It was just pipe dream, impossible to. Well, we built 50,000 that year, and then we went to double it and triple it, and so you gotta look back past these easy just obvious images and ask yourself, is that a facade, or is there and does it have any substance to it?
Well, it kind of speaks to when Obama was kind of downplaying ISIS, like they're the JV team,
Oh,
they're not really that big of a deal. And then it was like, man, they're all right, they can handle it. I mean, so it was more than we expected. So we kind of fell in the same trap as the other guys with us. I mean, would you say or no?
You know what? As you're saying that, I'm reminded of yet another example. Maybe this is one of America's, unacknowledged good fortunes. Everybody keeps underestimating us. And in the early days of the American Revolution, the British,
All right.
especially the officer corps, just had absolute contempt. And then after Bunker Hill, I can't remember which officer, one of the generals, writes back to London saying, if you think these colonials can't fight, you are in for a serious awakening. So, it seems to be that we're just a nation that everybody looks at and snickers until we show them
But in
otherwise.
their defense, if you do look at the media, like it's even worse now. Like look at like you just said, TikTok.
Yeah.
I mean, if that's all you saw of America was like people dancing on TikTok or doing stupid stuff or like fighting each other in the street or whatever it is, you would be like, man, this is going to be a pushover. But they don't see the rest of it. So go ahead, Nate.
It's same with other countries too. I spent a good deal of time in Korea now, and if you just saw Korea for K-pop, makeup, and Samsung,
Right.
right, you would have a very warped view of Koreans. But
Yeah.
you meet some of these guys over there, and you're like, there's some tough culture in Korea.
Right.
It's,
Yeah.
it's a
I've
very nose to the grindstone culture that isn't portrayed the way that Korea portrays itself to the rest of the world.
Right.
I'll tell you what, I've heard stories that you do not want to get on the bad side of the Rock Marines.
Yeah. Same. I've heard that
Yeah.
too.
So similar deal, right? To the way that countries might have been thinking of the United States and how they might be thinking of the United States now, right? Especially, we do have a lot of sloth in our culture,
Hmm.
but it's not everywhere.
Right.
Yeah.
I just think people don't see the whole thing. I don't think they understand quite how vast this country is and how each state is really its own individual entity.
I'll tell you one thing that again in this current setting, some people will think Miley Cyrus speaks for the American culture, but
Right.
I, you just surf around some of the social media, especially of veteran-owned companies that are just so outspoken in their support of veterans and
Hmm.
how veterans respond. Just there's a solid core there, and boy, I'll tell you what, even as old as I am, if they ever called me back, I'm,
Right.
you know, we got a lot of tough metal, and it doesn't always show up so obviously.
For sure.
Yeah, and there's also something interesting going on right now in industry, and this is related to Pearl Harbor, right? And us being ready to mobilize for war because aircraft, tanks, boats were all being designed to be built in a Ford factory, right? That was a design limitation, but it wasn't an extreme limitation. You could still build a very good tank in a Ford factory, even though it was limited by the constraints of a Ford factory. We have a similar thing kind of start here today, which is part of the reason why I'm such a big Palmer Luckey fan, and what he's doing with Anduril is he's getting away from the boutique assembly line of a Lockheed Martin, of a Raytheon, of a General Dynamics, and he's starting to be very outspoken to design weapon systems that can be built in a Ford factory.
Yeah.
Again, right? So, I live in Lexington, Kentucky. Up here in Georgetown is a massive Toyota complex, right? And he wants to be able to go to war and say, hey, this big Toyota complex in Georgetown, Kentucky, take my designs. You can now build all of our drones. You can switch from building Camrys to building drones, which is something that the United States hasn't had in a while. And it's really unique that we're able to do this outside of an active wartime. Well, I shouldn't say unique because that was the situation we were in prior to Pearl Harbor.
And I'll back that up by saying there's another instance of America having a long and often unsung history of, I don't know as people still talk about Yankee ingenuity, but you just take one thing, the Liberty ship, okay, with the German submarines sinking freighters faster than traditional shipbuilding methods could keep up with here in America. Along comes what's his first name, Henry Kaiser, and another instance of a time when our civilian and military leaders stepped aside and said, "Let the guy with the bright ideas step forward," because Kaiser just revolutionized not only bits and pieces like the Liberty ship's power transmission system, but also just the way ships are constructed. We had bits and pieces. I shouldn't say bits and pieces. We had chunks of Liberty ships being assembled in Iowa and Illinois, and then being put on trains to be carried to the three different coastlines that we had to be assembled like prefabricated homes. It's just it's amazing that we have this history of well, there is a smarter way to do it, and if allowed to, those innovators come forward.
It also
Yeah.
helps that we're geographically untouchable at that point too, because
Well, yeah.
if they had the ability to strike rail networks, then that takes away our ability to make ships in Iowa. And that's a huge factor to think about as well. That also along your lines, JD, might have been underestimated. They might have not. The other nations might have underestimated the fact that we could manufacture and move things around our own country with impunity, which is something that they couldn't do at all, especially once
Right.
we joined the war.
Right. Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that about there's a guy, good buddy of mine, his name's Glenn Brady. He stood up a company called Nanuq X, Nanuqx, and the idea was to build low cost housing up in Alaska, but it just wasn't happening. There were some roadblocks, people weren't cooperating. So he was like, "Well, I got to figure something out." And now he's starting to make UASs up here out of the same. Oh, I forgot to say, it's like he has a plant in his backyard that makes this this material that's easy to shape, easy to form, easy to make a house. So to your point, like there are people out there that are willing to take this effort up. So if and at a low cost, and it's really inspiring, I think.
And to sort of bring in another element of the Pearl Harbor attack, the uh, on the eve of Pearl Harbor, America's military thinking in several critical ways were really going to lead us down the primrose path unless people were to step in and change their thinking. And I have this great example. There was as soon as World War One ended, naval strategists and commentators were debating the impact of the airplane on naval warfare. And even though one of our own, Billy Mitchell, conclusively demonstrated that airplanes could sink battleships, the battleship admirals around the world not just here in America, were adamant that was impossible. In fact, there's an article written. I think his name was I can't remember, something Baldwin. He was one of the most popular military commentators in American journalism before the war, and literally a week before Pearl Harbor, he writes his assessment of the war as it's going on elsewhere, and he says. Up to this point, it has been conclusively proven that no airplane can sink any battleship. And a couple of, a week later, obviously he's singing a different tune. But thankfully, and maybe another one of the silver linings of Pearl Harbor, the aircraft carriers weren't there. That's a whole another debate. I won't get into that because it brings out the conspiracy theorists. But the aircraft carriers weren't there. The battleships were. And our battleship fleet in the Pacific took such a heavy hit. The only thing we had was aircraft carriers. And so, what we do in the next 6 months with those aircraft carriers just conclusively changed the thinking of the American Navy. And anybody who's had to work with the U.S. Navy, I like Henry Stimson's comment after the war, talking with Navy personnel. They at some point quickly just sort of go off in some mystic mode where there is no God but Neptune. Mahan is his prophet, and the U.S. Navy is the one true church. So to get the U.S. Navy to change its thinking on a dime and make the most. I don't know as nobody even came close to our carrier attack group ops concept in the Pacific. So that and another example. Up to that point, the U.S. Army had been looking at what Germany had been doing in Europe with Blitzkrieg, and their initial answer was not offensive but defensive. They were going to put their chips behind the tank destroyer. These were going to be tracked vehicles that may look like a tank, but their construction, their design, and their operational concept was defensive. That when they come at us with their armored spearhead, we're just going to pick off all their tanks. Well, I think fairly quickly, people, our army counterparts came to realize that a defensive use of armor was not going to hold up in the face of the offensive way the Germans were going to use it. So, Pearl Harbor really paved the way for America, taking a cold, hard look at how we were going to fight this war.
I don't know the answer to this, but maybe you do, Steve. Was the Marine Corps vocal about close air support at all? Right, because the carriers had
Oh,
to
yeah.
they had to have been thinking about CAS, with even having carriers and thinking about a war in the Pacific, right?
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, it's a very interesting story. The Marine Corps ought to get more credit for this. Even before, in fact, it was in the 20s. A Marine major was tasked with doing a fact-finding tour of Asia, and he came to the conclusion that there was not going to be any way America could fight a war in the Pacific. We, of course, even that early realized our most likely adversary was going to be Japan. There was no way we were going to be able to fight Japan without some sort of way to conduct amphibious warfare. Now, if you're at all familiar with Gallipoli in World War One, that had more or less convinced all the world's military leaders that the amphibious warfare was as obsolete on the battlefield as the horse. Well, the Marines took this major's report to heart and started working on fundamentally redesigning amphibious warfare. And of course, they folded Cass into that very, very critically. And then there's a moment early on in the Battle of Guadalcanal where, of course, the Marines were going to be relying on the Navy for aircraft carrier aircraft to provide close air support. Well, the Japanese Navy attacks just after the Marines have been put ashore. And what does the fleet admiral do? He takes his ships out to sea so that they can fight in a more open environment, and that leaves the Marines with no close air support. And that if you ever hear a Marine talk about how they will go down to the wire fighting for their control over their own caste, that's the reason. They learned in Guadalcanal that they cannot rely. It's almost like the Army's perpetual complaint that they can't rely on the Air Force for close air support. The Marines take to heart that they can't rely on the Navy for close air support. So they're going to make sure that they always have their own independent close air support and ships that they control that will stay there and keep that close air support coming.
Yeah, it's kind of like you were saying before, Steve, when we were talking about the A-10. I was like, well, maybe the Marines will take the A-10s. And then you're like, well, we probably won't see them then because the Marines support Marines first. And the A-10s
Yeah.
will probably just be in their AO anyway. So, yeah, that's a good point.
Steve, you brought up your point on amphibious warfare and the mindset towards amphibious warfare. That kind of puts me back on the strategy train, and it gives you a deep appreciation of the North Africa first in Europe
Mhm.
and all the practice runs that we then did. One, Operation Torch, which was we almost did a crawl, walk, run when it comes to amphibious landings in Europe, right? Because you have Torch, which is a massive invasion of North Africa, but not very contested, right? So we take North Africa, kick Rommel off of the continent, and then we go do the islands around Sicily. I read about this in my dissertation too, how they were practicing cast TTPs, pre-assault fires with artillery going into some of these smaller islands around Sicily, essentially as practice runs for the invasion of Sicily. We go ahead with Operation Husky, invade Sicily, and then we practice it again on mainland Italy. And then, right, so Torch is your crawl, Operation Husky is your walk, and then D-Day is your run.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting, right? Because it would have made sense that they were very scared of amphibious landings. And then what better way to figure out how you're going to invade Western Europe than have practice runs in North Africa and in the Mediterranean?
And the Navy does this sort of the same way in the wake of Pearl Harbor. Obviously, they have to fight this war. The American people want a war with Japan. By the way, I was making this in a Facebook comment to honor the day that a lot of people throw rotten eggs at that 2001 movie Pearl Harbor, the one with Ben Affleck and all that. But the one really nice thing that I like about it is they introduced Jimmy Doolittle early in the movie. That's the character played by Alec Baldwin, and then they don't ever say his name, or not in a way you'd notice until you get to the last third of the movie. And then it turns out Jimmy Doolittle is this guy who's been there all along, and he's had his eye on these two pilots, and he's putting together. And then they actually carry it through to the Doolittle raid. And so that's just one element. The carriers that we had, what few we had, were being sent out on very aggressive hit and run raids, and you could look at that as that's their crawl. They're trying out these carrier attack raids in a way to get a better idea of how to do their carrier ops concept, and they work it out. The first few in island invasions, Tarawa, for example, huge bloodbaths. But the Navy and the Marines both learn a lot, so that when they do end up going for the big ones like Battle of Midway, but also Coral Sea a month before that, they were both critical turning points that the Navy then used to turn the carrier group ops concept into just an absolute devastating machine. And so there's a land parallel to this, and a naval parallel as well.
It's interesting to me that Doolittle isn't a more glorified figure in Air Force corporate history, right? You go through PMEs in the Air Force. If you ever hear of Doolittle, it pretty much stops at Doolittle raid. But this guy was then went on to command the Strategic Air Forces in North Africa, and then rose to be the 8th Air Force commander during World War II. That's a huge role. And, he also had a huge role in the mindset of, the role of the fighter in the Strategic Air Force is to protect bombers, shifting that to the role of the fighter in a Strategic Air Force is to kill the opposing Air Force, right? Like those are huge, huge contributions to the war in both theaters. And it's interesting to me that he's not a more prominent figure as, a LeMay or a Spatz.
I got in a very odd place. Sometimes I feel like I just happen to be a fly on the wall at several. Maybe it's sort of like Forrest Gump, I just kept popping up. But when I was teaching at the Air Force Academy, they have a program where distinguished visiting, no, distinguished, I can't remember the official name of. They bring a very highly placed, not just Air Force. They had Hal Moore of We Were Soldiers Once Young. They had him come out and visit. They have this program where every semester they bring a very, very significant military professional to come and speak to the cadets. And it just so happened, it was run by my department, the history department, and it just so happened I was the project officer. And so every semester, somebody would say, we need to bring Jimmy Doolittle here. You know why they never did? He was not considered an Air Force professional. Why? Because he served on active duty on several occasions, but each time, as soon as the crisis was over, he would retire and go back to private life. And so we when it comes to George Washington, we hooray him, laying down his sword, handing in his commission, and going back to his farm. But when it came to Jimmy Doolittle, there's this weird, sort of grudge against him. I think this immediately makes me think of the perennial TACPs being the red-headed stepchild. We'll even do that kind of thinking towards someone like Jimmy Doolittle.
It must have been because he didn't, in their eyes, fight the good fight. He wasn't fighting the fight for strategic air power, the way that LeMay or Spatz did after the war.
That could be, but what they always said was he was not. What they are pushing, of course, this was during the Cold War, or just after it, where what they wanted every cadet to imbue was continued service for even 20 years wasn't enough. You had to set your sights on 30 years. That is a true professional's career. And if you don't meet that test, well, we don't care if you are Jimmy Doolittle. We're not going to invite you.
I hate that there's a Vandenberg Air Force Base and not a Doolittle Air Force Base.
Right.
Yeah.
That reminds me of oh, go ahead.
Real quick, he just looked like there's a guy like Vandenberg who, what did Vandenberg really do during the war? He led 9th Air Force and let his subordinate generals run it for him because they knew what they were doing and he didn't. And then politicizes his way up to becoming the first full-term Air Force Chief of Staff. But at the end of the day, what did he do? And you look at a guy like Jimmy Doolittle, who's, a combat master in World War II, an accomplished flyer, and he just gets no glorification.
Well, that reminds me of when I was in, we'd go through awards packages, and whether it be at Eielson or AFSOC headquarters or at the schoolhouse, wherever it was, when our guys were competing against other, and again, I'm not disparaging anybody. Everybody in the Air Force has an important job, and we couldn't do certain things without certain people. So, but what I'm saying is, all the guys should have to do is write down some combat tour bullets on a piece of paper and be like, this is what the guy did. But instead, it's like, well, did he help out with that car wash last week, or did he, how's his CCAF
Yeah,
going? It's like,
yeah,
dude, this
yeah.
guy was just, he just got a silver star for doing X, and you're worried about this other crap. Just give him the award. He clearly deserves it. Kind of like the Doolittle. It's like, well, you didn't do the other Air Force stuff, so you're not really one of us. You're just here to fight for your country, but you didn't do all the shoe clerk stuff when you got back. It's like, it doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, and it's I don't know what the solution is to, right? Because the Air Force values certain things and it can't treat people differently, right? You look at a community like the TACP community, most guys join to do that job, right? They
Right.
have an idea of the job when they choose to do it, and that's what they joined to do, was to be that guy.
Yeah.
But the Air Force doesn't necessarily value that guy, and we all know that.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
They don't want the guy who just wants to be really good at his job. They want the guy that looks really good on paper for value to the greater Air Force.
Yeah. A well-rounded
So
airman.
yeah,
Yeah. And
I don't know
I'm
if there's a solution to that.
I'm now about to torpedo any chance that anybody might call this old guy to come in and do anything of use. But you will notice in the bios of just about anybody with stars on their shoulders, they did not win all those promotions for their battlefield prowess. They earned it by being project officers in headquarters and being executive assistants to other general officers, and essentially, what you're saying. They're pushing the papers and distributing the packages and writing up a darn good staff summary sheet.
Right.
And
Well, and that's one thing I've complained about ever since I joined the Air Force, was that your worst EPR bullets are the things you worked the hardest on, and your best EPR bullets are the easiest things.
Yeah.
Like, the best EPR I ever had was coming out of a year in Korea, and my best bullets were, really, really fun TDYs where I stayed at a fishing village and ate awesome food. But I went and trained or evaluated a Korean reserve JTAC deployment, right?
Yeah.
Whereas that comes off as a really good bullet, but I did 5 hours of work on a 3-day TDY and spent the rest of the time
Right.
meandering on the beach, you
well,
Yeah.
know?
and to take that a step further, and to add on to my dissing of military leadership, in the when it comes to when it comes to pilots, I don't know if it's still the policy, but back when I was in, it was, once you reach the rank of '06, you could not fly without an instructor in the cockpit with you. Officially, I think they said it was because their jobs gave them little time for flying and all that. But
Mm.
I always suspected that it was because the last time they really had to build their reputation and prove their chops by their flying ability was back at least at the captain level. They
All
didn't
right.
get promoted because they were the best stick in the squadron. They got
Right.
promoted because of all those additional
Yeah.
duties.
All right, let's refocus back on the Pearl Harbor. We kind of got off. I could talk about this kind of stuff all day because I really, I got the short end of the stick a lot of times just because I didn't, I didn't go to push broom somewhere or
Yeah.
whatever, mow grass or whatever, or head up something. Anyway, but Steve, you were talking about. I'd like to talk about some individuals if we can. You mentioned right before we got on about Dory Miller, and just I wanted to recognize him because all the other guys that did great stuff at Pearl Harbor were obviously heroes. They're great dudes. But you're talking about a guy who nobody expected this dude to do anything, right? He was a
No,
cook or
no.
a mess sergeant, whatever he was, mess mate, gunner, whatever. but he got out there and like risked his life and fought for his country, and I think that's just phenomenal. I mean, what do you guys think about Dory Miller?
Well, to carry that story one step further, first of all, obviously this was not only still the segregated military, Navy
Oh,
and
right.
Army. Yeah, but also that segregation was only one aspect of the discrimination they faced. He was actually a champion boxer, and yet, even though he's proven himself over and over again, he's the one everybody put their money on. And uh, uh, obviously, it wasn't official policy that they gambled, but anyway,
Right.
and yet he's held down as a messmate, and then after Pearl Harbor, he's actually put in for a Medal of Honor. And the Secretary of the Navy at the time was, and I can't recall his name, widely reputed to be a racist, and he refused to award the Medal of Honor to Dory, and so they. A bit of hypocrisy here. The Navy then turns around and makes a big deal out of the fact that the first ever African American has been awarded the what is it, the Navy Cross is the next
Yeah.
highest one. Yeah, he's
Yep.
awarded the Navy Cross, first African American to ever be awarded a Navy Cross. Yeah, well, you know, there is a move still afoot, and I'm a signatory proponent of the convert that that Navy Cross to a Medal of Honor.
Right.
It's long overdue, but
Yeah.
anyway.
For sure,
Uh,
because you were saying he had 4 confirmed kills, but all the eyewitnesses said he had way more than that. And
Oh
for a
yeah,
guy
yeah.
who that's not his primary mission, I'm sure he was cross. All those Navy guys are cross trained on everything on those boats, just in case, firemen, whatever. So he probably had a familiarization with that gun, but that it's not like he was an expert at it. I'm sure. I mean, he got on there and did his job, and man, it's inspiring. I think. Nate, you're gonna
I'm
say
not
something?
sure.
I'd,
Oh, go
I'd be
ahead.
interested. I would just. It's one of those things I would love to be in his head when all of this was happening and to feel what he was feeling. Because it's hard to
Yeah.
imagine what drove him to act like that when the people around him aren't acting like that. Right.
Right.
Because, yeah, it's easy to forget how extremely racist the United States military is at this point. He
Yeah.
across the board, he probably had some very great friends, but in general, he probably was not treated very well. I mean, to the point where when they did integrate in World War II, it wasn't from a standpoint of equality. It was from a standpoint of they thought that if they had a all black company, they wouldn't fight as hard as if they were put a token black guy in a white company, because he would feel like he'd have to stand up and fight extra good because he was the only black guy in the company. Like, that's why they integrated in World War II. There was a psychological aspect to it.
Yeah.
So this guy probably wasn't treated well. So it makes me so curious. Why did he act the way he acted
Well,
during
to
Pearl
me, I
Harbor?
think it's obvious. I mean, I think that having said all that, kind of building that case, this guy was probably just a phenomenal dude. Just a
Yeah.
Yeah,
solid,
yeah.
guy, and it didn't matter to him. Yeah, he could take his licks as far as like the racism goes. He's like, you know what? This is what I'm. He's just a good guy. Just a
Yeah.
solid sailor. I mean, it just that's all. That's the only answer I can think of. I mean, he's down there
Yeah.
cooking. All of a sudden, they get attacked. He doesn't even hesitate. Just up there, just laying waste to these Japanese aircraft. And I don't know. I'm sure he was probably one of the best guys on that ship. Frankly, you know what I mean?
Well, one thing that I would add, and to piggyback on Nate's point, you mentioned there that everybody's cross trained. I don't think they would allow African Americans to get any training on any weapons at all. Not if there were any Southern whites around. That's the thing they feared the most.
That's a good point.
Uh, but the other thing too is, you know, there are certain people, when everybody else is standing around, there are some people who run to danger and run
Right.
to the sound of the guns, and that knows no bounds of race, creed, color, or whatever. I think you're right. Dory Miller was probably one of the best sailors on that ship, and that's without any kind of training or any kind of direction. His first thought is, well, what can I do to help? And he's going to go
Sure.
and find something. Also add to it, it's not often mentioned, but this was after he had already pulled the captain of the ship from the devastation that had hit the conning tower, or the bridge. So
Yeah.
this guy, he didn't just do one simple thing. He did several heroic things and then mans the gun.
Which,
Yeah.
mind you, is the criteria for a Medal of Honor.
Exactly
Right. You
right.
can get a Silver Star for a singular act, but the Medal of Honor has to be repeats
Yeah,
in
yeah.
one engagement.
Well,
Did the captain survive? Did he when he pulled him out of the
no,
wreckage? Oh, okay. See,
no.
that would have been a shoe in. I'm sure that
Unfortunately,
captain would have gone to bat for him had that happened.
yeah, yeah. Unfortunately, the captain expired of his wounds, but still,
Okay.
he just exposing himself to the flames and debris
Oh,
of
100%.
the
Yeah.
bridge, and pulling him to safety, or at least what was hoped to be a point where he could survive.
Right.
Uh,
He didn't know the guy. He didn't know the captain was dead at that point. So hell, he could have been alive, and then, like you said, died of his wounds on the way out or later. I mean, who knows? But
yeah.
the fact that he, like you said, sacrificed his own safety. I mean, that just screams awesome character. I mean, just a solid dude.
And just some in my research on just about anything that I dig into, I want to find as many first-person accounts as I can. And there's some
Right.
there's no shortage of first-person accounts that have been recorded of things that a lot of people did during the attack on Pearl Harbor. Uh, it just there are some that you hear more of, but if you go digging into some survivor recounting their actions, it's just amazing. Another reason why America should not be as easily dismissed as a bunch of wastrels and soft living dissolutes.
All right.
But
Yeah, I mean, it just
one
seems
thing that
like most, all the people that we've been around, it's kind of the same deal. Anytime there was any kind of attack or any kind of scrape that happened overseas or even in a training environment, our guys always seem really apt to or really motivated to, like you said, run towards the fight. I very rarely ever met a guy in combat in that kind of situation that was not of that caliber. Not to say that
yeah.
not Dory Miller's caliber. Obviously, he was like one of the best, but I don't know. It just seems like there's a type of person anyway.
Yeah.
Kind of
Have
came
you
up through
ever
that.
read On Combat by I think Dave Grossman?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
No.
So that is a very good book. I highly recommend it. Yes, Dave Grossman, On Combat. That's the psychology and physiology of deadly conflict in war and peace.
Mm,
And what he gets into there is it's what it says: the psychology and physiology of war, and how a very small percentage of people are responsible for the most amount of death in war.
Oh, right, right.
You go through guys like Audie Murphy and those
mm,
types. Like, wait, what is up with these guys when everyone else around them is just kind of there, maybe defending the guy next to them, maybe talk about Vietnam shooting up into the trees instead of actually shooting at the people. What is up with these
Right.
guys who are running around taking other people's ammo and going and fighting dudes? Really, really good book. I recommend that to you two and anyone who's listening to it to dive more into this topic.
I was just going to touch on the same point, recommending another book, and this one, especially guys who I don't want to have something real deep. This one's a real shoot 'em up, great story, and it's the last stand of the Tin Can Sailors. There was this they. I know they've made movies about it in the past, but they ought to make another one because this is classic Hollywood. The first invasion of the Philippines, 1944. The battle plan is that that the American invasion force is led by Admiral Bull Halsey. And if you remember in Hunt for Red October, where the Alec Baldwin character talks to the Sean Connery character and says, well, I'm an analyst. I wrote a book, Admiral Halsey, the Fighting Admiral. And Sean Connery scoffs and goes, I know this book. Your conclusions are all wrong. Halsey acted stupidly. Well, what he was referring to was Halsey's the overall commander of this invasion fleet, and the Japanese have a very elaborate counterattack plan that includes trying to lure Halsey out to sea to leave the amphibious forces on the beach unprotected by naval air support, gun support. Well, Halsey takes the bait. As Sean Connery says, he acted stupidly and leaves only a very small screening force. I think it's like 3 escort carriers. Those are they often were called jeep carriers because they just very small version of an aircraft carrier, and some destroyers. And yet the fight that they put on. And it's the pilots in the few airplanes that can be launched. It's the destroyer teams, crews that are attacking with unbelievable ferocity. This is a real David and Goliath story. Only it really happened. Not questioning anybody's faith, but this one they attacked with such ferocity that the Japanese admiral concludes that Halsey hadn't taken the bait and that he's facing the entire American fleet. It's just a great, great story.
That's awesome.
And again, the title, Last Stand of the Tin Can Sailors. Fantastic.
But that kind of speaks to, you hear a lot of those stories throughout our military history. John Basilone, from the Pacific, that he's that Marine that just, I don't know how many people he single-handedly took out, in that in a couple of skirmishes, I guess. But it's just like it's really amazing, and I think it boils down to kind of like you were saying. There's just that, or like what Nate was saying about there's just that certain kind of guy that, he doesn't need motivating to go out, but B, he also motivates everybody around him. That's the kind of guy you
Yeah.
need in that kind of situation, because as you're just doing what you're supposed to be doing, and then next thing you know, you're seeing this guy, and it's like, all right, yeah, let's take it up a notch, or and I think that's how battles are won. I think that's how, tables are turned on a superior enemy force by just, a couple of guys motivating everybody else or saving them or whatever.
There's a reason that morale has been so central to the debate on military strategy, especially during World War II, and definitely during World War I, right? That, a force with morale can face down a much larger force with no morale. But, the factors that impact that morale have always been counterintuitive. The idea was that strategic bombing would crush morale, but it turns out when you bomb the crap out of someone's city, they are much more motivated to fight you.
You just pissed them off. Now they're ready to go.
Now they're angry, right? Which is like,
right.
I talked about, Dory Miller's mindset, right? I imagine he was quite not happy. Like, I imagine he had, for lack of a better term, divine fury in him, to be like, no, I'm not laying down here. I'm probably going to die, and I am going to fight like crazy until I die.
Yeah.
Right.
Take as many of them as I can with me.
Right.
Yeah. And again, to loop this back into, our heritage, the American fighting man, our heritage is just riddled with these kind of stories. And I think that's also in the back of your mind. You're fighting with your fear, but you're fighting with what you ought to be doing. And then you see one guy jumping up and saying, follow me. And that tips the balance,
Right. Yeah.
One thing I'd like to circle back on if we still have time, and this ties in with something we've talked about in other instances or elements of the GWAT, and that is that for all of the innovation that we talked about that follows in the wake of Pearl Harbor, at no point did our military or civilian leaders mistake a successful ops concept as anything other than an ops concept. They didn't say, "Oh, well, we'll just go ashore on the beaches of Normandy and see what happens," or
Right.
we'll just we'll invade with our version of blitzkrieg and we'll naturally win. No, it was these were folded into strategies that were thought of for their own virtues, questioned versus other strategies, competing strategies, and then woven into our grand strategy. You know,
Mhm.
um, and again, Neil Sheehan just hammers away on this with Vietnam. But I think if we were to follow up on this theme with other discussions about the GWAT, we would find that they are following the same Vietnam pattern as opposed to what we did in World War II. The last time I think we did it right.
I think, I
Mhm.
mean, the absolute best example of mistaking an operational concept for strategy is Hitler in his worst days, thinking that, once it's like, wait a second, are the Soviets overrunning us? And wait, America is coming at us from the other side. The answer is more blitzkrieg, more blitzkrieg, more blitzkrieg. Take this new jet fighter that we made, which would have been the best air superiority fighter of the war, and turn it into a bomber,
Yeah,
right? Because that's our operational concept. But he wasn't calling it an ops concept; he's calling it a strategy, and that to him was the winning strategy. No, that was one way to fight. It was not your strategy.
Yeah.
yeah. You
He didn't
you
seem like a
build a
very flexible
plan.
guy.
Yeah, you
Yeah,
build your plan,
that's
your strategy, and then you look for ways to apply your ops concept to that strategy.
I mean,
And
would you
that,
call, not, I mean, I want to get off on a tangent here, but would you call Hitler like a military um, genius by any means? I mean, he probably stacked his deck with a bunch of geniuses, but then I think his downfall, other than him being a complete jerk, was that he didn't trust his guys. I mean, his guys were. I mean, I think there's a lot of documented stuff about how the people that were working for him, the generals, and they were like not. They didn't agree with what he was doing or how he was doing it. Or is that a thing, or am I off base on that?
yeah, you're pretty on point with saying that he didn't trust his generals. But not only did he not trust them, he just blatantly disregarded their advice.
Yeah.
If he had, you know, gave his commanders what we would call the ground commanders intent and let them do what they wanted, it's very likely that his vision of the Soviet Union crumbling could have happened fairly fast, right?
Mm.
Here's a Hitlerism of World War II. He was deathly afraid to repeat the Napoleonic mistake of invading Moscow and the Russians being willing to burn it down and evacuating it.
Mm.
He had this weird, I guess, superstition that if he invaded Moscow, it'd end the same way as Napoleon. And that's why he went to Stalingrad, right? Whereas he could have taken the seat of power in Moscow quite easily, but he chose not to and chose to take the long way around
Jeez.
totally against the advice of his generals.
Yeah.
And then, you get things like the no step backward orders, where
Mm.
his generals are saying we need to retreat, reconsolidate, and face this enemy on favorable ground. And he's saying, no, not one step backward. Anyone who retreats or takes a step backward, you will kill them. Right? There's
Which is also
multiple.
a completely idiotic strategy. I mean, like
Yeah,
you're not
absolutely.
motivating anybody at that point, you know.
Yeah, there's multiple points along the path where Hitler could have turned things around for his side, yet didn't because he felt like he had to be in total control of minute aspects of strategy, operations, down to the tactical level. There's no way your nation's leader should be in charge of, the tactical level of
Right.
your massive military.
I mean, you would
well,
probably even argue not even at the strategic level. I mean, that's not even. I
Right.
mean, just because you elect a leader, or he rises to power, doesn't make him a military strategist. I mean,
Absolutely. And at no point
that's why you
did
have a
he
military.
yeah, and he had no military strategy experience. He was a young
Right.
enlisted man in World War One, and he didn't have experience leading a large military until he provoked World War II. But he's like, invasion of Poland went really, really well. The invasion of France went really, really well. So obviously, I've got it together. And he never had an ounce of humility in him to trust his generals.
One thing that I've the more I study World War II, the more I hold this to be true, and that is that just about any question you ask about why didn't Italy do this, why didn't Japan do that, why did Hitler do this, is ideology. And when it comes to Hitler, well, especially Germany and Japan, they're both so deeply steeped in the fascist ideology that their decisions are steeped in this ideology. So, for example, Hitler's audacity. That's certainly one thing. All of his generals are saying, "No, we're not strong enough to invade Poland. No, we're not strong enough to invade France." And Hitler, with his audacity, says we're going to do it anyway, and it works. Okay, well, but why is he so audacious? It's because the fascist notion of the Superman being so vastly superior to everybody else, because everybody else is the Untermenschen, just deeply inferior to the German master race or the Japanese and the Blessed Realm and all that other jazz. It's when you look at their ideology, you can see a lot of things like his famous no step backward. In every German soldier is the Superman, and ordering him to not take a step backward will bring out that Superman, and he'll be able to overcome 20 of his counterparts because he's so superior.
One thing I wanted to touch on before we get out of here. What are your guys' thoughts? I've heard this. I don't know how much truth there is to it. I don't know where it stemmed from, but what's your guys' thoughts on the fact that we knew the Japanese were coming that day, and we either A, didn't do anything about it, or B, could have done something about it, but wanted it to happen? Or, what do you guys think about that? Do you think it was a complete surprise attack? I know there were some people that picked up some chatter and they told somebody else, and the guy was like, it's probably nothing. But was it a mistake, or was it a calculated, let's let those guys come in for either A, we'll take them out when they get here, or B, which is a heinous thing to think of, but given what we know about our government, let them attack. That would get us more motivation to get in the war. What do you guys think? Is that too much?
So I'm going to do my best to avoid, conspiracy theories
No way, man, dude.
well
Get
as they might
get into them.
come across. But here's the thing. Here's the thing. I said this earlier. If you're right, we put Japan in a box, on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a very high view of FDR as a grand strategist. It would have been a win to let Pearl Harbor happen if they knew it was coming, right?
Mm-hmm.
FDR fully suspected that the Japanese would attack because his goal at the end of the day was, one, the Japanese completely stop invading Indonesia and they don't expand from where their current ambitions lie. Or they attack the United States and give us the pretense to join the war that we've wanted, that he'd wanted to get into for the last, ever since it started.
Right.
His goal was to project American power and make America a superpower. The way you do that is join the war. The way you join the war is you get attacked to get the American people fully on board with joining the war. So from FDR's grand strategy perspective, an attack on Pearl Harbor is a win, as bad as that is to say. Now, do I expect that they thought it was going to happen on the scale that it happened? Probably not. They probably expected if Japan was going to attack, that'd be an open declaration of war. That maybe they'd start with some skirmish and try to, kind of punk us into ending the embargo. But the attack that happened on Pearl Harbor, I don't think was expected, but we were baiting them into a fight with us as a pretense to join the war.
Gotcha.
That was the idea. Now, the mechanics of how it happened, I know the big thing is that we saw them coming on radar and didn't prepare. I don't know what the mindset was on that level, but I
Right.
can say from a grand strategy perspective, again, purely from FDR accomplishing his goals, Pearl Harbor happening was a step towards him accomplishing his goal of making America the dominant superpower.
Steve?
I agree with Nate on the fact that we were putting Japan in a box. We were definitely goading them, and whether that was to get to initiate, to start a war between America and Japan, or whether it was just American arrogance and even racist attitudes that we would not do those sorts of moves like the complete embargo that we did with Japan against a European rival, right?
Mhm.
But more to the point, if he's trying to get a war started, right? First of all, if well, let me cut to the chase on this. Um, Pearl Harbor didn't have to be the devastating disaster that it was to get us into the war. If they did know that it was going to happen, then what would have been wrong with sending secret telegrams to make sure that everybody's ready, all the ammo is pre-positioned, and everything's loaded, and no, everybody was awakened at 5 in the morning, despite it being a Sunday, so everybody's at battle stations. You know, yeah, we could have. In fact, we could have even turned the attack around into a devastating defeat for Japan, and it
Mhm.
still would have been an unprovoked attack, right? Uh,
Absolutely. I
Right.
100% second that. That's the biggest deterrent to any conspiracy theory for Pearl Harbor is that we could have kicked their ass on Pearl Harbor and that would have served FDR's purpose as a pretense, which
and
is
Yeah,
why
one
I'm
that makes
kind of
sense.
and one
anti-conspiracy.
other thing too, and here's to me this is also another nail in the coffin of the conspiracy theory. Um, Occam's razor. Occam's razor says the simplest solution is usually the best, right?
Hmm.
Um, if we are goading Japan to launch an attack that will get us into a war, what is the most likely attack they're going to launch? Pearl Harbor was the farthest away.
Hmm.
Projecting power, there was no precedent. I don't think there's any precedent in history for projecting power that far away. Far easier to launch an attack on the Philippines.
Hmm.
In fact, that's where they expected the attack to come. And if anybody, not knowing what and if you were given a similar scenario, where would you expect the attack to land? And besides the fact the Japanese are about to launch a massive invasion of that area, the only thing that stands in their way is the American forces on the Philippines. So it just makes sense. Where are they going to attack us? Right where we stand in the middle of their path. So
Yeah,
those are my two thoughts.
with
Yeah.
almost little to no support, I'm sure, in the Philippines. I mean, as opposed to a whole base with the whole United States like just a couple hours away. And why it'd be smarter to? My point is, it'd be smarter to attack us
Mm.
forward deployed rather than our
Forget
home
about
base.
Australia.
What's
You
that?
Well,
can't discount Australia too much, right?
Oh,
Which is
okay.
a problem for the Japanese if they attack the Philippines.
well,
Oh,
and
good
and
call. Yeah.
also yeah, and also why was all of our army and naval strength concentrated in Hawaii? It's because we figured if the Japanese attack, it would be the Philippines, and then we would be pre-positioned to respond quicker. Um, and then also, by the same token, if you're going to concentrate all your forces in one base, which do you think the enemy is more likely to hit? This one base that's armed to the teeth and presumably ready, or this base that's out in the farthest reaches of America's military establishment, and is, oh, by the way, undermanned, understrength, underarmed. Uh, it just, I think what's so shocking about what makes for the conspiracy theories is because it was so unexpected, it was so counterintuitive, and of course, it turned out to be an epic disaster.
Hmm. I mean, that could have been it right there. I mean, they were like, they'll never expect us to attack Pearl Harbor. That's what we're gonna do, And I
But
mean, frankly, it worked. Maybe they were like, you know what? If we, like you said, if we go east the Philippines, Australia's gonna be there. They'll never expect this. And then coming in low. I mean, that's a long. But like you said, that's a long haul to come over there, and it's probably why they had a lot of kamikazes because they're like, well, you're not going home after this. You don't have enough gas. All right, guys. That was that's. I'm glad you said that because I hadn't heard that part from either of those. I like that. That's a good explanation. That it wouldn't make any sense for us just to give up the goat. Let's bait them in and then kick their ass, but let's not just take an L. That doesn't make any sense. So yeah, that kind of shoots the conspiracy theory out of the water. Because we could
and
have still, like
besides,
you guys said. Go ahead.
well, and besides, I mean, it's a tactic as old as human warfare: set an ambush.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and if it would have been a much different story if they had gotten the aircraft carriers and if they had gotten the oil. There's a
Right.
lot, like all the Pacific oil reserves were in Hawaii at the time, and they for some reason overlooked striking the oil, and they were only focused on ships.
That was supposed to be the third wave.
Uh,
And not because the aircraft carriers weren't there, they didn't know where the aircraft carriers were. The Enterprise actually, when they heard about the first wave, they launched ships, and those ships actually got there quickly enough to try driving off the second attack, second wave, as they were retreating. There wasn't much done, but still enough to make Nagumo sit there and go, well, we better count our lucky stars and get out of here before those aircraft carriers find us.
yeah.
Right. Okay. Cool. Yeah, I'm glad you guys cleared that up. Well, as always, this was awesome. I mean, very fascinating. You guys are a wealths of knowledge, and I appreciate you guys coming on. Do you anything you want to say at the end to wrap up? Any parting shots on Pearl Harbor? I mean, it's very fortunate we got to do it today. I love your guys' insight. I hope we gave it the respect it deserved and the remembrance it deserved. But yeah, it was a tragedy. But I think with heroes like Dory Miller and the other guys that fought back, it's a testament to like you, Steve, like you always say, it's a testament to that American fighting spirit. I mean, that's just what it is.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Yeah, good
Thanks
talking
for
to you. I'll see
having
you
us
next time.
here.
Yeah. All right, guys. I'll talk to you guys later.
All right.